Hey everyone, Jack Keller back for another buggy live stream with ZBrush, and today continuing work on the earwig. This is where we left off last week. So I did the abdomen, um, basic shape here with the tergites of various plates, and then the forceps down here, little pinchies, pinchies. And today I'm going to work on the head and the thorax, and I think I'd start by working on the antenna here. It's a nice little warm-up. These antennae are fairly simple. You can see we have a basic start of the antenna right here. These are mouth parts, so ignore this. They're not coming out of the antenna. It looks a little bit like it from that angle, but if we look at it from another angle, well, you can sort of see there's the back of the mouthpiece. And the mouth parts are actually the whole reason why I'm doing this insect, because it's a good example for the anatomy of insect mouth parts. That's some cool wings too. I mean, everybody kind of goes ick with these guys when you see them crawling around your lawn, but they're harmless and they are a great example for learning insect anatomy. So let's deal with the antenna, and let's do the most important thing, which is to count the number of segments. So we have our base segment right here, where it attaches to the head. We have a small one right here, and you can see that we have like 4 different shapes down here, and then the shapes become more or less fairly regular after that. So unlike ant or bee antenna, which have a very long initial segment and then sort of an elbow joint and then smaller segments, this is pretty much similar size segments all the way through, and you can see that they're kind of capsule shaped, so they're pinched off at the end. And we have a round part right here and then an angled part right here. So it's important to pay attention when you're doing insects to the various different antenna shapes that are available. There's a lot of variety depending on how the insect uses the antenna. And it's a great source of inspiration for when you're doing your creature designs and all that kind of stuff. You know, the antenna for an insect are as important as eyes are to a human, so make sure you don't skimp on the antenna for bugs. So I just have sort of a placeholder segment right here, and I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of ignore that for the moment because it's not super useful. It's just there for, like I said, a placeholder. And so what instead I'm going to do is let's append a good old append a star, and we'll just turn this into some geometry. I like to use a polycube, and I'm actually going to reduce all the segments on the polycube. And then just subdivide it. To a very, very simple shape. Let's count the segments. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 regular shaped segments, and then, like I said before, 4 irregularly shaped segments, for lack of a better term. So let's start down here. Thanks for joining today. Appreciate the company. It's always a concern when I do something that's a little bit less glamorous than what other streamers might be doing, but I think it's important for people to understand. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. You can see we have sort of like a blob right here, and then a more bulbous section right here. hold the control key and whoops, need to get rid of the subdivisions. Delete lower subdivisions, hold the control key and push this forward. And turn on dynamic symmetry. So that means that the dynamic symmetry means that it's using the gizmo as the center of symmetry, which is kind of useful when you're doing stuff like this if you want to have symmetry on. I'm going to, the other thing I'm going to do is let's make polygroups for everything. Here. Let's hide the antenna, it's not really useful. I'm doing this segment right here. Now we're getting to sort of the regular segments, starting with this one right here. Actually turn symmetry on on more than one axis at the same time. Might help keep these things round. Turn on this material so it's easier to see. Don't really need this on anymore. And let me see, I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Now what I'll do is just do polygroups, autogroups, and then turn my mask by polygroups all the way up. Let's save this sucker. And we'll just do a little shaping on this real quick. I might try just a quick ZBrush just because I don't like the stretching at the ends. I want these to be more consistent. So I'm just going to keep the same number of points, keep groups, do a ZBrush. That's pretty good. We could probably lower that a bit. You know, set this to half. Something like that is good. So what is that? That is 2,000 points for the antenna. I think that's okay for now. Let's see. My keyboard is probably switched to French again. Yep, sneaky. Keep it somewhat straight at the moment, and then we can go. Actually, let's do this. Use the Anchor Classic just to put a little bit of bend in here. Rotate. And a little bit of an S-curve. There we go. That looks nice. And then turn off dynamic symmetry, just turn off local symmetry altogether. And then I'm going to do a mirror and weld. It's not actually going to weld any points, but it's a nice way to mirror something very quickly. Modify topology, mirror and weld. There we go. And we have our antenna. So that's cool. Now get rid of the old ones. Selected. Always save before you delete a subtool, just in case you had the wrong subtool selected. There we go. Adorable. So let's think about shaping the head a little bit more. It is one of those tricky things because each of the reference looks a little bit different. See, this is a fairly pronounced angle going in before we hit this part, and then of course this is the mouth part right here. So let's take a look at some others. It's part's fairly consistent. It's hard to tell in these blurrier images. But you can see the plates right here. We actually have a separation right here before I have these plates at the front. I really should grab one of these guys in the backyard, take some better pictures. I think you can't see the divisions very well on that one. This is pretty good. I think this is one of the better images that we have. Let's straighten it out a little bit. Excuse the sniffing, sorry about that. So I'm going to turn on transparency. I've already Z-remeshed this, so I'm not going to do that anything too drastic to the shape. I'm just going to kind of give it a little bit more boxiness, and then we'll fix the eyes in just a second. It seems to be actually like a, I can't tell if this is an actual segment. It could be a segment that needs to be added there to the antenna. It's a little bit hard to say, but you can see this right here. Yeah, it kind of looks a little more like one more segment on the antenna. Let's check some of the other references real quick just to see. That's not helpful. That's not helpful. It definitely is. You see how these diagrams, they get sloppy. Not helpful at all, guys. This one looks, it does look like a donut segment. And the other ones are too hard to see. So we're going to do a little donut segment there, then add it, and if it's wrong, I can always fix it later. So I'm going to double click on this. And Something like that. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is just below the antenna, I'm going to, well, let's make a separation here. And so we have a choice here. We can keep this as this one piece, or we can actually separate this into a literal second segment. So you see we have sort of this right here, and then one other piece coming out below there. That's definitely going to be another segment because it might move. I think in the long run, it will look better if these are two different pieces of geometry. Just from experience, you can get away with carving it into it, making it look like it's separated, but it's a little bit more satisfying to have it as an entirely separate piece, and it's easy enough to ZBrush these guys, so I'm not that attached to the topology that I've created already. So what I will do, I can always duplicate it. Duplicate the subtool and work on the duplicate. So do that. Whoops. Hide this one. And delete lower subdivision levels. And delete higher levels. I think we'll do this. I'm going to make everything one polygroup. Masks this section. And do Control W, that makes that a polygroup. Let's do Control Shift X just to grow this polygroup. And then hide some of these. Control W, okay, bring everything back. And then I'll do a Dynamesh. And subdivide it a couple times. With groups on, and that'll separate these into two pieces of geometry. It's just one way to do it. There's like a dozen different ways you can go about doing this. I'll do that. That's fine. Excuse me. And then we can make this other plate here by simply duplicating this one and shrinking it down. So I can do that by control click on here, turn off symmetry, and just control drag this, maybe squish it down a little bit. Make it, oops. Oops, turn symmetry back on. believe on the either side here we have a separate mouth part, the mandibles right here, but I'm going to leave that for just a second and just push this out a little bit. Then what I can do here is let's do a little bit of prep for doing a ZBrush, just kind of like we did last week. Create a polygroup out of that. Create a polygroup out of that. And let's do a polygroup out of this. There's a polygroup set up there, and then I'm going to do a ZBrush with keep groups. That's pretty good. So we have a nice poly loop around the outside and a poly loop on the inside there. The only thing I don't like is this right here. So let's move this out of the way real quick, and I'm just going to see if we can fix that with the Z modeler brush real quick. I'm going to hover over this and choose delete. That looks pretty well, right? Yeah, kind of a lot of edge loops right here, man. That's all right. Good enough for jazz. Okay, so let's subdivide this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this and just store this point in undo history for this. Go over here, Control Shift click on this. Actually, let's do this. And we'll do project history. I have these buttons down here. Why am I not using them? Project all, project history right there. And one thing you can do is I can actually store a morph target. Brain stopped. Let's store morph target. Then project history. And then we can use the morph brush just to quickly clean this up right here. And then bring everything back, and there we go. So, you know, a little bit of work, but now I have better geometry for the head. And I still had the same, I didn't lose this, because of projection I can keep the the work that I did sculpting the other part of the head. I can just work on these parts right here. Okay, so let's save this guy. And then I'm going to delete this old head right here. Excuse me. And then I'm going to get out some of my favorite brushes. Cloth brush, and then start just outlining around the eyes here, just to tighten this up. Kind of focusing mostly on the top here, understanding that things will probably change as I look at it from other angles, but we kind of just get some place markers for the different shapes that we see. This is the fun part, but it's also the most challenging because you have to kind of rely on what you're seeing through the specular highlights here to kind of get a sense of the form. And that can be, you know, tricky. You know, kind of like this angle right here. Do a bit of an exaggerated version, and then maybe a slight depression right here. Excuse me for a hiccup. My brain stopped again. I'm going to go to looking for my clay tubes brush, and it's not there, so I'll just use my regular clay tubes. And I'm just going to turn on back face mask. less space there. See, interesting shape down here. Here's using Damon's standard brush. Kind of dial in this triangular shape. Is it actually there? Hard to say. Again, it's the specular highlights here can be really misleading, so you gotta kind of tread lightly and let things change as you see them, and understand that you're probably going to be changing them again later when you look at a different picture or a different view, etc. Some of these divisions are more important than others. Some might be particular to this particular organism or a result of some kind of damage. You know, these things are dead, so we're looking at corpses here. But you kind of just do what you can and allow things to change as needed. So as you're watching me do this, you might see different shapes than I'm seeing. That's okay. I will eventually resolve them. Kind of the fun. It is a lot like anybody's ever tried to, in a life drawing class, draw the human back in a pose. You know that a lot of times you start to see things and you play tricks with your mind beyond what you might just see from studying anatomy. You know, it's like the same thing. It's like if I look at this, I'm seeing all kinds of insane details and different subtle changes in the planes. If I look at the illustrations, you get this. It's like not the same. Even this, which is a really nice illustration, the more you look at it, the more you realize it's very simplified, which might be a good thing, but it's not quite what we're seeing here. So I also like to work on a piece for a while, leave it alone, and then move on to another piece and then come back. Here's another view we can see. Yeah, that's a tough one. Can't see anything there. I can see some stuff. I definitely see that division right there, so I'm happy about that. This is just a couple of lines here and there. We have kind of a line. I had that before. Kind of try and match the angle a little bit. So yeah, we got this line. That's there. I like to use the clay tubes with very low Z intensity to just kind of slowly work those shapes in. Notice that this insect, excuse me, notice this insect does not have ocelli. There's that trio of extra eyes that you'll see on bees and some ants and wasps, some wasps. This one does not have it. It just has a single pair of compound eyes as far as I can tell. I don't know what I'm doing down there. Just So we need to think about the mandibles here and how they affect the shape that I'm working on now. Alright, I'm taking too long to do something which should be very simple. Let's do this. Duck. Accidentally made a duck. Still looks like a duck. That's okay. Let's take a look at the mandibles. I can't read it, but it says mandibles. So there's mandibles right here on either side of that plate. These things always look great until you zoom in on them and you're like, oh my god, that's so blurry, I can't see anything. I'll go over here. This is the underside. Yeah, it's really hard to tell. This one's not too bad. Here we go, finally. So this piece right here is what I'm thinking about. We have, here's the head that I just made. We have this plate right here, which is what I was just working on, and then this plate coming out. And then we have the mandibles, which is this section right here. They come on either side of this plate. And then we have additional mouth parts right there. So this is a very nice, it almost looks like there's ocelli here, but I don't think that is. I think that's just perturbation. Okay, this is what I need. Perfect. I knew I had a decent image in here somewhere. So, let's see how far we are from the truth. So we can see that we have this going in like this, and then this coming out like this. So this is a bit long. So we can pull this back. Let's go down. This is the kind of thing you see in a mantis. So we're going to just bring in some temporary shapes right here for the mandibles, understanding that they're going to change later. But at the very least, it will fill out the silhouette a bit better. I could see what the thing that I made as a donut is really just kind of like a blobby little flap here. So let's do this. And move this over here for a second. Save. And then all right, my brain stopped again. Let's do an insert. just do a cube just like I did before. So I do have the fortunate that I'm working on this particular bug for a very specific reason. I'll be working on an animation explaining insect mouth parts with an entomologist. Since I'm not an entomologist, I'm just somebody who likes sculpting bugs. So I had the advantage of knowing that even if I get this stuff wrong, I have an expert that I can go to who is gonna help me fix my mistakes and make it more accurate. Somebody who's actually studied this. In fact, he's the one who requested that he's the one that I requested that I do a earwig. His name is Joe. I can't pronounce the last name. Joe Rakowski of OSU. So he's the entomologist I'm working with on this project. It should be kind of cool. And I think hopefully helpful to everyone. We'll be releasing it on Entomology Animated YouTube when we're finished with it. That's kind of the goal. Let's hide the antenna for the moment. And what I'll do with this thing is I'm going to There are two consequences for you, life or Pluton. A to Z, all of you. Alright, cool. Thank you for the update. So this is just going to stand in objects at the moment, so I'm not going to worry about what they look like from the bottom. Just trying to get this silhouette right. It's tricky. Tricky to rock or rhyme. So if we take a look at this, you can see that on this version we have this bump right here and then this bump right here between the eye below the antenna. And so it's a little bit more space on this one. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the angle. Something like this, I think. Be adding more detail later. Move this over a little bit. See, I'm getting very particular here. Once again, it's always tricky when you have multiple pictures. But you can see here on this version right here, you can actually see the top segments of the mandibles right there. And then this is the mouth part underneath this. So this right here is this. It looks pretty good though, overall. I think what I'll do is I'm going to increase the geometry right here and maybe work on some of the detailing. It's nice to dial these in just because it could get a little confusing as to what you're looking at the more you look at these shapes. So just dial this in real quick so that I can remember that which part is which. Let's do auto groups real quick. Make it easier to move these parts. Sort of triangular shape coming down. I definitely had that. It's just a little bit harder to see. This one is nice because the lighting is so much easier to see what's going on. I mean, a whole other can of worms. Maybe that's a pun, I don't know. When we get to the underside, especially because I don't have any good pictures. And I think that's where I'm going to have to make an effort to get better reference. Whether that means grabbing an earwig from my backyard and then putting it under a macro lens, taking some pictures. That's probably the best way to go about it. I don't have the same microscope that I used to have when I lived in LA. I had a pretty nice stereoscopic microscope, but now I have some old USB ones that I might be able to get to work, although they kind of use their own software. It might work through the camera app, I don't know. I'll have to give it a try. But maybe to make that a goal for the next week when I do this live stream to have better reference. Because then you got to sort out what's a bug and what's a piece of dirt. And what's a piece of schmutz or half-eaten meal, all that kind of good stuff. So that gets tricky too. But you can see it's like it's messy, but I like it. I can smooth this out and just keep working over those shapes until they start to actually match the reference a little bit better. But this is not too bad. Excuse me. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. That looks pretty good. You might want to just leave the head there for a moment so we can come back at it and look at it with fresh eyes later. Because otherwise you start doodling and doodling and doodling and not getting very far. So what we can do at this point is maybe take a look. Oh, this is a nice image. I didn't even notice that one. Alright, scratch that. Let's go back and at the very least we can shape these mandibles a bit better. Yeah, what we want underneath this right here, okay, I can see, that's tricky. If this is where the antenna is coming out, then I think I need this line to come more like this. Right, and then this right here is interfering. Yeah, if you're going to come on here into the chat room and start trying to drop science about biology, just be aware you're most likely working at a deficit, because I've actually been doing science type related stuff for a long time, and I'm not really going to discuss pseudoscience when it comes to DNA. I keep losing my polygroups for some reason. I'm not sure why. I think it's my keyboard keeps switching to French. Very irritating. Another word for DNA modification, and it's called cancer. And I've already been through that, so I don't need to go through that again. So I'll pass on your offer if that's okay. So I have a question for you. Since you're dropping stuff in the chat about DNA, see if you can answer this without looking it up. Tom Cech, the famous scientist, who I've done work with actually, who won the Nobel Prize, I think it was in the late 80s, for the discovery that RNA is its own catalyst. It self-catalyzes. Explain to me, without looking it up, why that's significant enough to win somebody the Nobel Prize. Why does anybody care whether or not RNA can catalyze itself? What does that mean? If you can do that without looking it up, then we can discuss DNA modification. Or if you want to, you could just make it simple and explain to me how mRNA works and why it's significant. Or if you want to make it even simpler, we could just do 9th grade biology and you could explain the difference between transcription and translation. How about adaptive radiation? What does that mean? How does that have to do with anything? And why is my keyboard keep switching to French? DNA, I think genetics for a lot of people is like quantum physics. They like to drop the words, the terminology, the buzzwords without really understanding what they mean. It's a really great video or animation that I worked on a long time ago with Tom Cech, where he explained the importance of why RNA is its own catalyst. And the greatest thing about the video is it really explained how the scientific method actually works in reality. Is that most good scientists, the kind of scientists that win Nobel Prizes, are very suspicious when they get results that confirm their own hypothesis. They don't jump around for joy and say, give me the prize. They say, okay, this can't possibly be the way that I predicted, so what is going on here? Let me do everything I can to disprove my own hypothesis. And only then, when I've done every single thing that I possibly can to disprove what I believe, and I still haven't disproven it, then I can say maybe I actually had the right idea. And it works very different than what you see in popular culture. A good scientist is someone who's highly skeptical of his own ideas more than any others. In other words, in science, if the results are too good to be true, they probably aren't. I'm not here for science talk. Well, I'm doing a ZBrush live stream on insect anatomy and entomology. This is science talk. I know it's not as sexy as saying, oh, I'm going to do yet another xenomorph from Alien. I'm going to do yet another egg or yet another face hugger. All of those things, xenomorphs, face hugger, the eggs, everything about alien biology and everything you see in a decent science fiction movie has its roots in this, an earwig, a lowly, disgusting creature that most people don't want to spend more than 10 seconds thinking about. So this is all about science talk. But if we could talk about DNA modification, that's science talk. This is an art class that is also DNA classroom. Sorry. There are other live streams if you want to watch, how to sculpt sexy babes. There's plenty of that as well. Personally, I don't understand why people are so resistant to studying biology. I mean, that is what you are. To quote Decker from Blade Runner, how can it not know what it is? You're threatening? No, you're just wrong. But I would say, yes, you are threatening, because if you look at how much misinformation about biology, basic biology, how much destruction it caused during the COVID epidemic, yeah, it killed a lot of people. So yes, you are threatening, so you can congratulate yourself on that. Okay. So one thing you can notice about this, this is message to Pixelogic. Don't play FSB. Okay. Well, you lost me on that one. If we look at this, you can see that significantly this is a very shriveled picture. This is a dead organism, so we're looking at a corpse here, and something to keep in mind when you're trying to do this kind of stuff. It's why it's best to look at live pictures whenever you can, but of course the problem with live pictures is these guys tend to scurry about. Okay, so you can see this, I believe, is movable. This is the hair, so don't confuse it for a division. So you can see in this case it's kind of bent down a little bit and then sort of maybe moved outwards. By the way, just to make a finer point here, Pixelogic doesn't exist anymore. I hate to say it. ZBrush is owned by Maxon. Just say that Maxon is doing some cool stuff. I know it sounds like I'm a shill for them, but this is the Maxon stream. They're allowing me, they're hosting me and doing my art and my thing on this. I did get a demo recently of Autograph, which is the new Maxon competitor to Adobe After Effects, and it's pretty impressive. The most impressive thing about it is it's absolutely free at the moment, so you can actually download it and use it. It's a layer-based compositing system, a lot like After Effects, but it has some really nice features to it. I haven't had a chance to play with it, but one thing that's kind of cool is that you can actually bring in 3D objects into your comp and manipulate them and even do basic rendering in there, which is really cool. And it also has an animation editor that's a bit more like a typical 3D graph editor, which I've never liked the After Effects editor. I don't do a whole lot of motion graphics, but I do enough that I have to use After Effects every once in a while. So Autograph is definitely worth checking out. And then I'm hoping this week, if I have some time, to do some YouTube videos on ZBrush for iPad. I've done a few recently, some shorts that I put up about scanning. So I've been going around scanning. It's not bug related at all. I've been scanning some architecture, some medieval architecture around these parts here in France, which is really nice. Some cool abbeys and some sculptures and architectural details, which is a lot of fun. And the ability to scan directly into ZBrush is really nice. It's very convenient, especially on an iPad. Well, yeah, I mean, there's like the ghost of Pixelogic. There's still some Pixelogic websites, and I'm pretty OG myself. I mean, I've been doing this at least since 2004, so that's well over 20 years. And I've been a ZBrush beta tester for the past 10 years or so. And I'm good friends with, Paul Gabriel and all of those guys. But if you're going to send messages to this stream addressing Pixelogic, you should be aware that it's actually Maxon. Alright, I'm not even going to get into that. That's just silliness. I remember the internet used to be fun. Good day. Okay. Okay. Let's see this and move back to the thorax. Like I said, I need a little break from looking at the head so I can come back with it later with fresh eyes, maybe better reference. I think that's pretty good for now. It's definitely got the major shapes kind of in place. It's just a matter of pushing them around and figuring out where the detail belongs. So we can go over here, which is, I believe, the pronotum. Make sure I have the right terminology. Yes, pronotum right here, this shield-like thing, and you'll see this on some beetles as well and other insects. You can see it's this kind of shield, this little plate above the wings. Take a look at it from a few different views. See how the earwig actually looks more and more interesting the more you get into it? I mean, even the most insignificant little speck of a bug, you put it under a microscope or a macro lens, and you can see some really amazingly beautiful things in the structures. Really good, very inspiring stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly do a ZBrush on this. I don't think it needs any more dynameshing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some polygroups so that it can have a nice, when I ZBrush, have a nice edge loop going around the outside. So I'm going to just kind of angle this like this, go down to the polygroups menu and do group front. That projects a polygroup from the front. Let's make sure it's symmetrical. I'll do a mirror and weld. And now turn on symmetry. It's already on. Keep groups, half, ZBrush. Do that a few times. And since we have a polygroup, you can see that we have a nice edge loop that goes all the way around the outside. It's kind of a quick and dirty way to do topology without, because this is not something that's worth doing hand-read topology on. and take a while, and then the results wouldn't be that much better than this. But I think that's perfect the way it is. Most thing I worry about is just having an edge loop that goes around the outside here. And then we just want to kind of give it this square shape. I'm going to have to probably add some geometry for a neck underneath this. So I'm going to separate this a little bit. Let's just move it down. Now let's subdivide it. Oops. That's weird. Aha, there's a max on there for some reason. Still feels like this could be longer. Let's see, I'm just kind of dialing in these shapes here, and then I'll probably hit it with a H polish. Keep it a little bit rough and loose. It's not a robot, so it's not about that type of precision. The precision is more about matching the forms of the actual animal and getting the anatomy right, but it's not about, I guess that's why I don't do a whole lot of like cars and that kind of stuff, because I kind of get bored with doing super precise lines. I like organic shapes a little bit better. I've done some hard surface, but it's definitely not my forte. If you are curious about doing a hard surface in ZBrush, then Paul Gabry is the best person to watch. He's the most knowledgeable about every single trick. There's a really cool trick that I'll show that I learned from him recently. It's something I kind of knew in the back of my mind, but I didn't think about it in this particular way. So this has to do with sort of morph targets. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'm going to go in my undo history here and just delete my undo history just to clear it out. And so I'm going to keep this as my base shape here. And rather than store morph target, which is kind of the old school of doing that, I'm going to control click on the undo history. Let's do this. Just to store that point, so you can see how it's shaded in gray. So this point in undo history has been stored in a memory, similar to a morph target. And now as I create details, I can actually use the morph brush to sculpt back to that point in history. And one way you can do this, now obviously I could say take my clay tubes brush, do some sculpting, smooth, etc., whatever I'm doing. And maybe I want to go back and fix that. Well, I can use my morph brush to go back and kind of erase to that stored point in history, this point right here, as opposed to right here. Well, another cool thing you can do is you can use the, we know that holding the shift key brings up the smooth brush, right? So you can see every time I hold the shift key, the cursor turns blue and the brush turns to the smooth brush. Well, it's really what the shift key is think of it as a secondary brush, a hotkey for a secondary brush, and the default secondary brush is the smooth brush. But you can change the default secondary brush to a different brush by simply holding the shift key, let me move our little reference here, holding the shift key and then clicking down on the brush you want to be the secondary brush. So in this case it would be the morph brush. So go in here, morph brush, where'd you go? Let's see if it'll work right here. I'm going to hold the shift key and then hold down on the morph brush. Let's switch to a different brush. Now you can see whenever I hold the shift key, rather than going to the smooth brush, it's going to the morph brush. So now what I could do is I can draw on here, do whatever I'm doing, and then if I want to erase back to that stored history state, I just hold the shift key. And instead of smoothing, I'm morphing. And this is a really great, this works really great with layers, especially because layers are a great way to utilize undo history. So I'll show you what I mean. Let me get rid of these details. So let's say that this is our base shape here. And I'm going to go into my 3D layers. And I'm going to store a shape. And or store a layer rather. And let's name this base. So this is our base layer. That's what this state is. Now I'm going to create a new layer. And let's call this like noise. Right? Or it could be any detail. Anything that we want to record onto this layer will be stored in that one. But we also have the base layer, which has no changes. So let's go in here and I'll just apply some surface noise. Like this or something like that. I'll choose OK. And then I'll do apply to mesh. And let's do another layer just for good measure. Do another layer and I'll call this details. And let's just say we'll go in here and do something like this. Now, since we're using undo history for, as opposed to a morph target, undo history is storing our, where we want to store our preferred layer, whatever we want to get morphed to, our morph target. We're going to use our undo history as our morph target. If I turn this layer off, notice that when I turn layers on and off, it's stored in history, just as if it was an action. So if I turn off my base layer, sorry, and turn it on again, see how, watch the orange thing move across, it's storing that. So I could turn this base layer on and off and store this state in history, control click on it. So that's stored in history, and now I can go back, turn these layers on. Maybe I'll create a new layer and I'll just call this cleanup. Try typing. And all I'm going to do in this layer is use my morph brush to morph back to that base layer. So I can start to eliminate some of that detail, both the noise and the detail layer. And this, you know, you think about it, we practice with this enough, you start to realize that this is a very non-linear workflow, because now I could use my layers as morph targets. Let's say I've erased that detail and I've done too much, and my art director comes by and says, no, you got rid of too much of the noise. Bring back some of the noise. The client approved the noise. Why'd you mess it up? So, okay, all right, well, I have these stored in layers, so I'll just turn this off. Turn off my cleanup layer. Turn off my details layer. Those actions are stored in history. Control click on my undo hit point with just the details or just the noise layer on. Just turn it off and on again just to make sure. Store that in history. Go back to my cleanup layer. Use my morph brush. Oh, I gotta make sure that I have this in record mode. Turn record, cleanup in record mode. And now I'm holding the shift key for my morph brush and I'm dialing that noise back in. So it's not just the base layer that you can use as your morph target. You can use any layer, and you can go back and forth like this all day long and create a truly nonlinear sculpting workflow. And the thing that makes it a little bit easier is having that morph brush as your secondary brush, because then I can just hold the shift key and paint over this anytime I want. That's kind of a some cool techniques there that can make sculpting a little bit more non-linear and fluid and a little bit easier to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these layers because this is just for demo. I don't actually want these. So just delete all of them. And I'm just going to go back to my base layer here. I'm going to get rid of all my 3D layers, but just thought I'd give you a little demo there since we're talking about weird science and not ZBrush. Bring back the ZBrush talk. Yeah, earwigs, I mean, they still give me the willies just because they always tend to dart out. I prefer them to houseflies any day. I can't stand houseflies, even though I bottled a lot of houseflies. Oh, I see I still have that morph target to that noise layer, even though it's gone. That's state in history. I'm going to switch back to my smooth brush here. I'm not sure why they got the name Earwig. They don't do anything to your ears. They're not a danger to your ears. I think it's just people wig out when they see them. Okay. That's pretty good. For now, we're going to do more detailing later. Let's take a look at the elytra here. So this, I believe, this is the bottom of the wings sticking out from underneath the elytra, but let's trust but verify. think these are the same image. You see a division there, but I'm not sure if that's actually a separate piece or not. Let's take a look at this diagram. Yeah, so you can see, there we go. This diagram is very helpful because this is showing, this is the hind wing, this is the hind wing unfolded, this is the bottom sticking out, and this is the tegmen, however you pronounce it, right here. So we're going to work on the tegmen next, and that's the way I have it. And then this is the wings, or the just placeholder wing shape. So we're going to work on this a little bit. So this looks like it's part of the wing. This looks like the edge. You can see this is a bit shriveled because it's dead, so we don't necessarily have to have all of that detail in here. But let's Nintendo DS as a child. You know what I had as a kid? Atari 2600. That's right. I'm old. And we loved it. Actually, it was crappy. Even back then, we knew it was crappy. It's kind of funny. Back in those days, you know, video games, the ultimate video games was what you could find in an arcade because those machines were far more powerful than anything you can get at home. So everything you bought, you compared to those games. Donkey Kong or Pac-Man or whatever. If the Asteroid's a good example. So when like Asteroids finally came out on Atari 2600, it's insanely disappointing. Same with Donkey Kong and all of those. Pac-Man was just irritating compared to the arcade version. But then they came out with the ColecoVision, which was really interesting. It was the first system that actually could really mimic what you'd have in the arcade. And then bizarrely, the video game market completely collapsed. A very strange time, you know. It's hard to imagine today that an entire video game industry could completely collapse because they saturated the market. That doesn't even seem to make sense in today's standards, but that's exactly what happened. People just lost interest in video games for a while. It's the same thing with Star Wars. It's interesting because Star Wars is practically the new Catholic Church now. I mean, it's just everywhere. I think that it's losing popularity with a lot of the younger generation. They're kind of like, whatever, Star Wars, I don't care. And who can blame them? Each generation needs their own thing. They don't need to be constantly reliving previous generation's thing. Otherwise, we'd all be watching Flash Gordon. But there was a time after Return of the Jedi came out in the 80s where nobody talked about Star Wars for like 15 years. Even mentioning Star Wars, people would be like, "What kind of nerd are you? That's ridiculous. Who gives a crap about Star Wars?" It wasn't until the prequels came out, like a year or two before, when they started releasing the special editions in theaters, that Star Wars started to become mainstream again. And then it became too mainstream. But I remember being a Star Wars fan when I was younger and being picked on for it quite a bit. And then some of those famed people who picked on me for loving Star Wars so much suddenly became overnight diehard Star Wars fans the minute Episode 1 came out, which I thought was funny. I'm going to do a ZBrush on this again, kind of the same way. A little trick you can use. I'm going to Control Shift click on this to hide all the other polygroups, and then Control Shift X to expand visibility just by a single row of polygons. It's a nice little trick. I'm going to do this, and now I have a purple polygroup and a blue polygroup. And I'm going to do ZBrush key groups. And see how that neatens up the topology quite nicely. And now I have an edge loop that goes all the way around. Am I still a Star Wars fan for the trilogy? You know, I think that's a really great question. The way I see Star Wars, well, I thought Force Awakens was pretty good because it brought back what we loved about Star Wars. Han Solo, Millennium Falcon, etc. Unfortunately, it was a retread of Episode 4. It's funny because I actually got a job at Bad Robot, but I started like literally the week after Force Awakens came out. I was working on 10 Cloverfield Lane and then eventually Star Trek Beyond. When Last Jedi was okay, I thought they did some interesting things with the Force. I did think they did some terrible things with Finn's character, and also, you know, it's just, it was like almost an interesting movie, and then The Last Jedi was just god awful. Last Jedi is an embarrassment. It's not even a Star Wars film. And then of course all the Disney shows, some are good, some are not so good, and then Andor is amazing. It's so good it's not even Star Wars. So Star Wars is like, the Disney version of Star Wars is like an abusive relationship. Every time you're like ready to quit and say, that's it, I had enough, it's like a bad girlfriend or bad boyfriend who comes back and convinces you to get back together with them. And then you get back together with them and say, oh, this is great, for a little while, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my god, this is the same horrible broken relationship that I had. And so it's like literally an abusive relationship, in my opinion. So am I a fan of Star Wars post Disney? I like some of the stuff that they accidentally did, like Andor. And Mandalorian was pretty good. I didn't mind Mandalorian and Grogu so much, but I went in the movie with thinking it was going to be just like another season of Mandalorian, which it is. Also, I saw it in French, which I thought the voice acting in French was pretty good. So I don't know. That's my answer. It's sort of a non-answer. If Rey had amnesia, forgot she was a student of Luke, that would have been better. My favorite is just all the jokes on somehow Palpatine returned. You know, it's just like, that was, you know, it's like so funny when you watch it. That's the only Star Wars movie. The Rise of Skywalker is the only Star Wars movie, theater movie, with the exception of Grogu, that I've only seen once. Like, all the other ones I've seen multiple times, but I don't think I could sit through The Last Jedi again. I think it's too painful. Watching Poe Dameron say, somehow Palpatine has returned, you can see the pain in the actor's face. You can see how much he just hates saying that line. Cracks me up. So I'm trying to bridge this gap here real quick. I'm going to do it with an inflate brush, a very low Z intensity. So close this up. That's just one way to bring these things together. I guess somebody pointed out, it's like, you know, when Finn starts screaming about the stormtroopers, oh, they can fly now, oh, they have jetpacks. And he was like, they had jetpacks in like the Phantom Menace, you know, or sorry, the Clone Wars. Man, stormtroopers have had jetpacks for a long time. Boba Fett famously had a jetpack. It's like, it's not that surprising. The other thing I find interesting, there's our friend complaining I was talking too much about science, and I can complain that I'm talking too much about Star Wars. um, what always cracks me up is like, one of the main, most popular powers that a Jedi has is making things float, rocks or whatever. But it's like everything in Star Wars floats. Land speeders float. Probe droids float. Everything floats. So, like, what's the big deal? I mean, I guess it'd be like, a human being be able to microwave something with their mind. That would be impressive, but at the same time, it's like, floating is hardly a surprising thing in the Star Wars universe. Okay. Just working out the shape here. This is similar to the elytra on a beetle. It's what was once the all insects, flying insects all started out with 4 wings. So if you think of Meganura, the ancient dragonfly, has 4 wings. And then over the course of evolution, some orders of insects, some species of insects have 1 pair of wings has evolved into something else other than a wing. So with flies, they've evolved into the halteres, which is these little pointy knobby things that the fly uses as a gyroscope, which is why flies are so incredibly acrobatic. So they will have 1 pair of flying wings and 1 pair of little knobby halteres. Whereas beetles and like our earwig here, 1 pair, the front wings have evolved into this elytra, or in this case, I guess it's called the tegmen, which is kind of like a shield that covers up the hind wings. So in beetles and in this order, Dermoptera, the hind wings are the main wings. Kind of interesting. Yeah, the thing for me was Rey has a force and saber skills without training. Yeah, it's kind of a typical Mary Sue type thing. I always find it irritating when people just have like magical abilities. I mean, you could argue that Luke Skywalker spent basically like a 4-day workshop on Dagobah before he faced Vader, but he didn't do so well in that fight. I don't like it when characters just have magical abilities without, amazing skills without actually earning them. The only exception to that is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but she has the explanation of being, so-called chosen one. But even Neo had to earn his skills, to some degree. But I don't like it when it's just too easy for them. And that's this thing with Rey. Rey would have been much more interesting a character if she relied on her sort of scrappy scavenger skills to get what she wanted, as opposed to magical force abilities that seem to come out of nowhere. But I think the thing that bothers me the most about Rey is it was interesting when she was a nobody, and then they're like, oh, nope, she's Palpatine's granddaughter, and then at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, she's like, my name is Skywalker. I'm like, okay, how do you get that? But I don't know. Like I say, I like Andor. That's a great show. Rogue One was pretty good. It's kind of funny because I watched Andor, the entire series again, and then at the very end of it, we watched, my wife and I watched Rogue One, and even Rogue One suffers by comparison to Andor. It's still pretty good. It's funny because it has you start to notice like there's constantly music playing in Rogue One because it's a movie, and everything's a bit more melodramatic but also a bit more superficial, whereas Andor has so many levels of depth to it and complexity that it's just amazing. I always thought that the perfect example of how to make a character slowly turn from good to evil is Walter White. I don't think you get any better than that. Of course, it took, you know, a couple seasons for him to actually make the change completely, but it's completely 100% believable and interesting. If they had had the time and the energy and the faith in their audience to make Darth Vader's change from good to evil more like Walter White, it would have been so much more satisfying, you know. Yeah, Rogue One would have been a great movie. The blind guy pulled the saber out of the stick in the end. Or maybe the stick kind of like magically transformed or something. I don't know. I did like that character a lot. Those characters. I forget their names. The blind guy and his friend were like, a great callback to Star Wars original inspiration, being, a combination of Western movies and Japanese samurai films. So I always liked those characters. I thought they were pretty good. But yeah, this is too bad. Just unfortunate what Disney did to Star Wars, but what are you going to do? Hopefully someday I'll get a chance to get back to LA and see the new Star Wars museum that they're building. It's supposed to open up in September. It's the film of cinematic narrative or whatever, but we all know it's a Star Wars movie. A Star Wars museum. Let's take a look at this guy so far. Okay. So I know I spent a little bit too much time shaping that. Those attachment. I don't know what I'm going to do about the hind wings. I only have one reference for them, and it's a diagram. And the way they fold, this is going to be tricky. So I think that I'm going to have to consult with some entomologists on how to do that. One thing I haven't really successfully done is show how wings, like beetle wings, fold up. There is an artist, a Houdini artist, that did a really great animation on that. He spent so much time like working out how they would actually fold using pieces of paper and stuff like that. It's really admirable what he's done, and I need to do something like that. And there's some great references on YouTube for high-speed film photography of insect wings and stuff. I don't like how unlikable Walter. Yeah, I think you could make a very good point there. So he says, I didn't like how unlikable Walter White became in the second half of Breaking Bad. Better Call Saul did a better job. Better Call Saul is an amazing show, slower paced, but I think in the end, I like it better than Breaking Bad. I like Breaking Bad a lot, but Better Call Saul was truly amazing. But wow, they really asked their audience to be very patient with that show, and really, really took the time to develop those characters. I do kind of like how Walter White is still he's a very intelligent idiot, he does some really stupid stuff. I think he had a bit more of an inner conflict because his motivation was a big part of his motivation was based on his failure to stay at Grey Matter, seeing all of his scientist friends get ridiculously wealthy off of his research, and I think that's an interesting motivation, along with just his ego and his desire for power and stuff. But I would argue that both Saul Goodman and Walter White are still more interesting character development than Anakin Skywalker. It really comes down to the problem with the prequels, as well as the problem with all the Star Wars movies, I think, is they just hurried the stuff. Like Return of the Jedi is really 3 movies combined into one, and they didn't do a very good job of it. If they had just taken the time, I guess George Lucas got sick of Star Wars by the time Return of the Jedi was in production, which is too bad, because if you'd taken the time to really do it right and do 3 movies as opposed to cramming it all into one, it would have been a much better story. And it's kind of the same thing with the other movies. I kind of feel like with the Rise of Skywalker, they were just trying to kill it. And I think, I watch a lot of Red Letter Media. I like those guys. I think they have really great takes on a lot of these things. So, and most of the criticisms, I think, of J.J. Abrams have been pretty much spot on. I did have the actual opportunity to work with him a little bit, so, and I actually, when I was teaching at the Gnomon School, I was teaching a summer course for high school kids, which they do every summer, and I actually had J.J. Abrams' son in my class as one of the students. It's funny because all those kids in that class, I mean, they were really interesting to teach them, but they all came from, it was an expensive course, so for summer school for a high school kid, so you tend to have some fairly wealthy kids in that class, and so I got to get a little window into that world, which was interesting. But Pluribus is from Vince Gilligan too. I haven't watched Pluribus at all. Is it good? Which streaming TV video service is that one on? If I haven't heard of it, it's probably on Apple TV, I'm guessing. I think this looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap this up for today. And next week I'm going to work on the actual, next week I think I'm going to get some better reference, because I think I'm running out of decent images to really figure out what's going on with the wings and the thorax and the underside. I'm going to need more than I currently have. So that means I'm going to have to go on a bug hunt and find me an earwig and take some pictures. It will probably be a dead earwig. Oh, right before I leave, I will show you a couple things. If you go into the preferences, you do have, my settings are pretty close to the default settings for most things. But if you go to tablet settings, you do have sensitivities under preferences under tablet settings right here. So you can play with these. I'm using default for all of this stuff. But the other thing you can do is you can change the brush sensitivity on a per brush basis. And to do this, go into the brush menu and go down here to tablet pressure. So right now, let's say I'm using Damien Standard Brush, right? So Damien Standard Brush, if I go down here in the brush palette under tablet pressure, the global settings, that's using what's in the preference. If I turn this off, then that means I can go in here and use these graphs to very fine tune exactly how the tablet pressure, so this is low pressure, this is high pressure, and this is, say, draw size or Z intensity or RGB intensity. So you can go and mess with these for each of these different aspects of your brush, and you can really get in there and it makes a big difference. It's worth spending some time fooling around with those settings and play with them, because you can design some really cool brushes that way. And then what you want to do is, just if you have some settings you like, make sure you save the brush under a different name. Use the brush palette, save as, and save it somewhere in your local drive with a particular name, so that you can load it in and use it again. Because otherwise, when you restart ZBrush, these individual brush settings will be lost unless you save the brush. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, tablet settings are totally customizable. Preferences, tablet, all of these guys right here. You can also change your 3D mouse settings. I'm not using a 3D mouse. And then brush palette, scroll down for whatever selected brush you have. You can use tablet pressure graphs right here. And you can even change, you can actually you can choose 2 different alphas or 2 different textures with a brush, and then use the pressure sensitivity to change how the alpha is switched from one alpha to the next. Right, so if I go, I'll just do this real quickly. Use a standard brush, for example, and I'll use 2 different alphas. So I'll use the swirly alpha, and I'll use, what I'll do is I'll go into brush, alpha, and texture. And under alpha, I'm going to use, let me dock this real quick so it's easier to see. Alpha and texture. So I have speckled brush when the pressure is low, and swirly brush when the pressure is high. And if I go in here and let's say, see, I'm brushing really low with this brush, and now as I start to brush, it's not as obvious. Let's do this. Let's do this one. So low setting, and then I'm pressing harder and harder and harder. Let's see. Yeah, see, I'm pressing hard, and then I press light, and you can see it actually transitions from this speckled brush when I'm pressing light to a single alpha when I'm starting to press high. That's a really cool option. I haven't explored it nearly as much as I could, but it can save a lot of time from switching between brushes when you're doing detail, because you could then use the Z intensity slider under tablet pressure so that the Z intensity is always the same, but the alpha changes. So the Z intensity is the same if I'm pressing really lightly and really hard. Oh, maybe not. Yeah. I think that actually messes with the settings, so scratch that. I'm using a Cintiq. It's like a 24-inch Cintiq, which I got, I think, in 2022 or 2023. So it's a few years old, but Cintiqs last a really long time. I had a Cintiq, an older Cintiq, that lasted for like 15 years. The only reason I don't have it was just too big, and when I moved to Europe, it was too big to move, so I gave it to somebody. Okay, that's it for me for today. Hopefully you enjoyed today's live session, in spite the weird science, aka political debate that we had in the middle of it. I'm going to continue with the earwig next week. I know it's kind of a weird model to be working on, not as sexy as a xenomorph, but very important for anybody who wants to learn insect anatomy and see how I go about making something like this using just reference as opposed to scan data. It's a bit more of a challenge, but you can learn a lot on the way. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys next week.